And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather, continued northeast winds here out of the interior across the Bering Sea. That'll be gradually falling or pulling colder air out into that area. Otherwise clear and cold over much of interior Alaska. A few more clouds here and flurries up over the east and especially northeast part of the state with a winter weather advisory continuing for the eastern Beaufort coast tonight. And increasing snow over the southern panhandle and stays windy and cold over the northern southeast coast. Increasing clouds, chance of moisture reaches Kodiak Island tonight. And then the remnants of this front will bring a few showers there to the Alaska Peninsula, staying dry for the eastern Aleutians. Windy and gradually colder for the Bering Sea, about sums it up, but dry and windier and turning colder here over southern Alaska, actually turning colder over the entire state here tonight and into Sunday as temperatures start to warm up over the southern panhandle as snow moves northward. And then we've got snow all the way up to White Pass on Sunday, with snow changing to rain as temperatures rise into the 40s over the southern southeast coast. But clear and cold, temperatures well below zero in the afternoon or through the day, day and night actually here from the Arctic coast right on down to south central Alaska and the southwest coast here. Better chance of snow and blowing snow for the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians as this low just comes onto the chart there and edges northward. For coastal water forecasts for the central and south coast, or actually the entire coast here, east winds 20 to 25 knots, a little more northeast on the extreme north coast. Lynn Canal, north winds 25 knots, east winds 25 knots for Stevens Passage, and north winds 15 knots for Clarence Strait. For the day on Sunday, east winds 20 to 25 knots on the south coast, Clarence Strait, east winds at 20 knots, otherwise Stevens Passage, north at 30 knots, and gale force northerlies there for Lynn Canal. North coast, east winds 30 knots. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 15 knots. East northeast 20 to 30 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Northeast at 15 for the west side, and northeast 20 for the Barren Islands, but stronger winds for Kamishak Bay and southern Cook Inlet out of the northeast at 30 knots. Lighter winds at 20 knots from the north, northern Cook Inlet. And for Sunday, northern Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15 knots. Prince William Sound, northeast at 20. And for the North Gulf Coast, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots with 8-foot seas. Barren Islands, north winds 30 knots. Gale warning, southern Cook Inlet, north at 35 knots and northeast at 40 knots for Kamishak Bay. Alaska Peninsula, north to northeast winds 30 knots for the day Saturday. Northeast 30 knots for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island, about the same, or it will be the same, northeast winds 30 knots. And for Sunday, Kodiak Island, north to northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. We've got gale warnings now for Bristol Bay and the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. Gale warnings for north winds 35 to 40 knots and north winds 30 knots from Sitkinak all the way down to Cape Sarachev. Western Aleutians, northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. Adak and Atka, northeast winds 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians, north to northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. And stronger winds in store for these areas for Sunday. For the Fox Islands, north winds 40 knots. North to northeast winds 35 to 40 knots for Adak and Atka. And the Western Aleutians, north to northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. For the southwest coast, north winds tomorrow 30 to 35 knots. Northwest or northeast at 40 knots for the Pribilofs. Northeast winds 30 knots for St. Matthew Island and St. Lawrence Island. Oh boy, a sneeze about to hit me. And for the southwest coast on Sunday, south of Nunivak Island, north winds at 40 knots. North at 40 for the Pribilofs, north winds 30 knots for St. Matthew Island. And for the Yukon Delta coast, looking at north winds at 25 knots. Same for Norton Sound, brisk wind advisory there as well for north winds 25 knots. And for Saturday, still windiest here over toward Kaktovik and Barter Island, west winds 35 knots, west 25 for the area around Prudhoe Bay, and the central coast west at 10, west side west at 10 for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And for Sunday, north winds 15 to 20 knots there for the Chukchi Sea. And light winds out of the west and northwest for the central and western Arctic coast down to 10 knots and West winds at 15, finally dropping off here for the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline.